Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Romani. And as promised, what I wanted to do was bring sort of a seminar to you, really as a thank you for getting this channel to 1 million subscribers. That is meaningful because as the channel sort of has more traction like that, more people are told about it. And that means more people are learning about these narcissistic relationships and the impact they have on them. And above all else, the only reason I got into this was to help people feel like they're not the crazy ones, basically. So again, so consider this sort of a thank you gift for all of you. Like I said, this is a seminar. We've done a variation of this, and actually this is a chance for me to actually gussy up this presentation a bit. We've done these presentations like this in the past. We do them on a different platform. We charge for them. So it's a real pleasure to give everyone in the world this. So sort of free content, bonus content, and also that if you find this useful, it's the kind of thing you can go back to, take notes, learn from, because I feel, and as I thought about like, what would I want to give everyone on YouTube, but like a really robust look at, it's gaslighting. Because I think that above and beyond the narcissism piece, if you could sort of really get your head around how to deal with the gaslighting piece of this, that you are really going to be in a much better place to not only manage the garden variety narcissists in your life, but really difficult people, manipulative people in general. So again, my thank you to you. I hope you enjoy this presentation. Stop it, start it, do what you need to do. And hopefully you learn a lot more about gaslighting than you thought you knew. So let's talk a little bit about the history of the word, okay? The film Gaslight, I think, came out in 1944. The play that it was based on in 1939. If you haven't seen this film, it's dated, it's black and white, and I don't know that anyone could make it better than they did back then. The roles of people and everything like that in the world were different, but they nailed it in this movie. I remember the first time I watched, I was like, oh, and I watch it over and over again saying, wow. So you can pretty much get it for almost nothing on many platforms. But what were the themes we got out of this film? So 1944, ain't nobody talking about narcissistic abuse or narcissism or any of that back then. But somehow this concept, and it was actually from this film, from this play, that the word gaslight came to mean this sort of manipulation by denying reality, right? But the themes we saw in Gaslight were isolation, this idea of using a narrative that was believable to sort of, get to this place of, to rationalize fear and suspicion, because it was believable what was happening. Capitalizing on vulnerability. The young woman in the story, she was somebody who had gone through a trauma and was being made to live in a place close to the trauma. The relationship moved very, very quickly. Like they met and almost right away got married. It had like a stalky feel. He sort of showed up to a place where she wanted to be alone on vacation. There was a power differential. Not only was there a gender issue because of the time in history it was, but also that he was older than her. There was triangulation where he involved household workers in sort of his manipulation. But above all else, he convinced her that there was something wrong with her. And then he put her impairment, this idea that there was something wrong with her, on public display. So again, if you haven't watched it, watch it. That's where the word comes from. Now, a lot of you people have said, I've only been hearing this word in the last few years. It's true. I have to tell you, the first time I heard the term gaslight or gaslighted was in my own therapy, believe it or not. And that was back in the 1990s. And a therapist was using it to refer to something I was going through. I said, oh, isn't that interesting? I've never heard that use of the term. So, and when you go into the scientific literature, you're going to see there's not a lot written about it, which is really a shame, because I think once you understand gaslighting, a therapist is in a much better position to work with a survivor. What is gaslighting? Let's all get on the same page with a good definition. It is psychological manipulation, and it leads a person to question their sanity. Okay, the person being gaslighted, right? So it leads a person to question their own sanity, and it's systematic. It doesn't happen over one time. It happens many, many times, where a person denies reality, generates doubt, and then the person who's being gaslighted starts to doubt their own experience, believes they have problems with their memory, with their perception, their judgment, and even how they feel. Andrew Spear, who's a philosophy professor who studies gaslighting, says it causes a person to question their own grip on reality. And when we are gaslighted long enough, we actually do believe there's something wrong with us. And most people would agree, it qualifies as emotional abuse. So it's important we view gaslighting as a process. Okay. Again, it's not a one-time thing. And it's not just one person saying, I never said that. That's one of the bricks of gaslighting, but it's a lot more complex than that. It is a process, and I'd argue it's a grooming process. Step one is they take advantage of trust. You may trust them because they're a family member. You may trust them because they're somebody you're in a new relationship with. You may trust them because they bring a certain amount of expertise into a situation, like in the workplace. In step two, you start seeing there's a theft of reality, not just your reality, of reality. And so they deny reality. They deny your experience, your instincts, and your perception. In the third step, they convince you that there's something wrong with you. They might, so the kinds of accusations they hurl at you will be like, you're crazy. There's something wrong with you. I think there's something wrong with your memory. Have you seen a doctor lately? I think that medication's affecting you. So they're starting to convince you in a plausible way that there's something not right with you. Step four is that they continue to repeat this process until you consistently doubt yourself. Did I say that? Did I do that? Am I okay? Maybe my memory's off. Am I the narcissist? And step five, the process has been repeated so much, the gaslighted person's reality is shot. And so the person who's being gaslighted gives in. They give in to the reality that the gaslighter has, right? It's sort of like, okay, I'm crazy. There's something wrong with me. You must be right. And when a person is fully indoctrinated, they no longer push back. But to the world, it looks like you're in agreement with the gaslighter, typically a narcissist, right? So the world's like, oh, they're on the same page, not knowing that in essence, what you went through was a brainwashing process very much led by gaslighting. So if we look at it as this long pathway, you have the trust. They enhance the trust by spending lots of time with you. Maybe you start falling in love with them. Maybe it's love bombing, or they isolate you. So if you get isolated, you have no opportunity to get your reality sort of checked out by other people. Then they test the waters to see if after they get your trust, if they can deny reality. If that works, then they're going to keep doing it. And then that's going to slowly sort of peel away your self-esteem, your reality in general, and your belief in yourself. Slowly but surely you're dismantled, being told that there's something wrong with you. But to this point in the process, you may be trying to provide evidence like, look, here's the text. You said to me we were meeting tonight. Or look, you said this, you told me this. You start bringing emails and DMs and text messages. But instead of the gaslighter copying to it, you know what they do? They're like, really? That's our relationship is really just showing each other text messages. Is that how petty you are? Is that how paranoid you are that you need to do this? Wow, I don't even know if I want to be in this. So now you're confused. Do I want to be in this? Because they're doubting your commitment because you're showing them text messages. They're saying you're paranoid. You feel a little frothed up. They continue to dismantle you. If you keep showing up with the text messages and the evidence at some point, because let's face it, you are showing them reality. Well, they don't like that. So how do they get their control? They doubt your commitment to the relationship, or they say they're going to end it. They're like, you know what? This may not be working. You know, what is this? You show me the text messages. You clearly don't trust me. You clearly don't believe me. So you know what? Maybe you're just not that into this. But that's not what you wanted. You didn't want this relationship to end. You just wanted to show them like, hey, this is reality. You said that this was happening, and now you're saying you never said it. You're just trying to have reality back. But instead of them addressing reality, they doubt your commitment or they threaten to abandon you. So what do? You're like, oh, I don't want this to end. So you're like, okay, fine, whatever. Right. It doesn't matter. You're right. It doesn't matter if you said it or not. Of course, I'm in this relationship. The more of that you do, you never show the evidence again, right? You never try to say, look, there's the text message. You know what's going to happen. So you don't. And if anything, you start giving into their sense of reality. It's easier for you to just go along. And then it looks like you've been brainwashed. It looks like you're consenting to the things they say or do because the fight is out of you. So it's almost like one of those alien films where the alien comes and like sucks the life force out of someone, and then you're no longer sort of you. That's what by the time you get to that purple square, that's what's happening. So the language of gaslighting is very much language that doubts reality and tells you there's something wrong with you, because it's that two-step process. It's not just the denial of reality. Then they hit back with, and there's something wrong with you, right? It's things like it's minimizing your emotion. It's denying things happened that clearly did. It's telling you that you're mentally off. It's taking things that are very real and heartfelt and minimizing them and saying, why can't you take a joke? It's labeling your emotions for you that may not be true. For example, accusing you of being angry, telling you that you're not able to let go of the past. So when you're providing evidence, you're trying to make an argument saying, we've been here before. A year ago, this happened. 6 months ago, this happened, right? So it's really showing, you're trying to show someone there's a pattern, reality. They'll turn it into that you're somebody who is petty and aggrieved and can't let go of the past. It'll be about you being an exaggerator, or a complete denial of your emotional experience and them getting to judge it, telling you that you're getting worked up when maybe all you're doing is putting emphasis on a point, telling you it's in your head, or even using your own biology to doubt your experience. So these are the kinds of things that gaslighters say. And when this happens, you're thrown off balance. So who does this gaslighting? I mean, obviously we know that this is a narcissist ground game, and people with all kinds of high conflict personalities tend to gaslight. We also see that people who are powerful tend to gaslight. Why? Because they tend to own the reality, right? The more power and money you've got, the more likely reality is sort of what you say it is. People who want to be powerful gaslight too, because then they're able to control and dominate other people. People who are very much, their defenses are things like denial and projection, literally a denial of reality, projecting their bad stuff onto someone else. You'll see gaslighting there. By and large, it's the ground game of insecure people, and they offset their insecurity by attempting to dominate other people. This doesn't happen with strangers because strangers don't have a trust, right? They could do it for a second, say, well, I didn't see that, but you might sort of roll your eyes at that and walk away. But somebody you know, somebody you trust, that's where it's more potent. One way I've described this is that gaslighting is when it's the pathologically insecure, typically narcissistic people, preying on the conventionally insecure, which is the rest of us, right? So the gaslighter wants power, they magnify our insecurity, and then they get more powerful because then they get to dictate reality according to their narrative. It's not good for us. Lots of bad things happen to us when we're gaslighted. And frankly, a lot of it overlaps with the patterns we see in people who experience narcissistic abuse, which makes sense. But when you're gaslighted, you second guess yourself, you feel really confused and anxious, you're definitely frustrated. You know, all that stuff in red is the stuff that really kind of overlaps with narcissistic abuse there. Your identity shifts, you get isolated. Many times people who are gaslighted are told untrue things about, like, you know, hey, I want you to know, like, your friends have been calling me and telling me that, like, they're kind of annoyed by you lately. And they're actually telling you, like, stop bothering them with all those calls. It's a lie. But that's the sort of thing where now you think like, oh my gosh, my friends think I'm annoying, and you may not call them. Boom, you become isolated, right? So the impacts of gaslighting, I'd say, are very, very similar to what we experience when we're being narcissistically abused. And above all else, gaslighting kind of saps our bandwidth, right? So when we're gaslighted, we're often like ruminating about, like, did I say that? Did that happen? Is there something wrong with my mind? Well, if you're spinning like that, you're not paying attention to work, to school, to other caregiving responsibilities, or even to stuff you enjoy. You're often churning. And to me, gaslighting in that way is really a sort of almost a form of theft. And again, you feel indecisive, you just feel like you're not in your life anymore. And there's different things that make us gaslightable, right? Number one is naturally, it's normal to want to trust. I mean, human relationships are kind of predicated on the willingness to trust. So we want to trust someone, especially if it's somebody new in our life, a new friend, a new partner. We have hope that people are honest and good and have our best interests, and we want to believe in that. But then there are things specific to our own histories. Like I said, narcissistic people and people with high conflict personalities, they tend to be pathologically insecure. right? The rest of us have our own levels of insecurity. The more insecure we are, the more gaslightable we are. In addition, it's also our own self-esteem. If our self-esteem is cratering, we are more likely to be gaslighted. If we've been gaslighted in childhood, that's what I mean by legacy issues. If you have a history of having been gaslighted, you end up being more gaslightable in adulthood because you have this pattern in your life of doubting yourself, of second guessing yourself, and actually believing that maybe I don't remember things right. And this can really be pronounced if you had a history in childhood of any form of abuse, and that abuse was denied by other people. Other things are people who want to trust, who want a sense of safety, and may just give in to the gaslighter's manipulation. A history of trauma makes people more vulnerable, and people who have heightened abandonment fears, because they're afraid of abandonment, may give in rather than saying, whoa, 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 my reality, step back. And keep, they won't show the text messages because they're afraid someone will leave. But then there are bigger ticket structural issues. The more marginalized a person is in terms of societal power, the more likely they can be gaslighted, because the world often gaslights people. The less power and privilege a person has in society, the more gaslightable they are, okay? We also get cultural messages that put us at risk. Things like blind obedience to elders or other cultural messages, which may not be earned, kind of respect. And when we're told that we just have to believe and respect people just because they're older, just because they're in our family, that can set people up to be gaslighted as well. So there's lots of things that come together, from social norms to things specific to us and our histories, to things in the world at large, that all make us gaslightable. We lose a lot, right? We lose our sense of reality, our belief in our own instincts. We sometimes lose our own sense of identity. If somebody tells you there's something wrong with you enough times, you're crazy, you're off, your mind doesn't work, what's wrong with you, you're disorganized, you might actually be a really organized person. You might actually be a really mentally with it person. But if enough times reality is being denied and you're being told you're off, hear it enough times, you start to believe it. And then before you know it, you're walking around saying, oh, I'm just really disorganized. I've seen this happen many times. And people have said something like, wow, you're actually really organized. Where is that coming from? Is that, again, that lifetime indoctrination through gaslighting. We lose our sanity. We don't understand that we're good at things. Many times gaslighting is about, again, it's about domination. So the gaslighter doesn't want you to believe that you are good at something. So we'll deny that you are actually good at something, as well as our critical thinking and our discernment abilities, which are absolutely critical because they're gatekeeping functions. The more discerning we are, the less likely we are to let new narcissists into our lives. But when we're gaslighted, we doubt our judgment. Let's be clear on what gaslighting is not. Gaslighting is not just lying. A lot of people's like, well, is that a lie or is that gaslighting? Okay, I'll get to what the difference is more clearly in a moment. It's not stalking, it's not yelling, it's not a difference of opinion. Listen, we're living in polarized times, and a lot of us, even in the same families, have different opinions. If I'm talking to a friend and they have a very different political opinion than mine, they're not gaslighting me. They just have a different opinion. If, however, they skew reality and hold that different opinion, that might be different. But somebody having a different opinion than yours is not them gaslighting you. If somebody says, I get that you're saying that soup is hot, I think the soup is cold, they know you, they're acknowledging you found the soup hot. They're saying, I think the soup is cold. That they hold ground on their cold soup experience, but they're not denying your hot soup experience, right? And then any other differences that might be in our belief systems, none of that's gaslighting. However, though, if these differences, so let's say you do hold, I don't know, a political or some other ideological difference from someone, and then they start pushing back like, wow, you really are insane. Only a crazy person would believe that. That becomes a different game. That a difference of opinion automatically means somebody's not sane. Difference of opinion is a difference of opinion. You may even say like, I don't even respect you because of that difference in opinion, but it doesn't mean they're gaslighting you, you're gaslighting them. But if you say, I don't agree with your opinion, and I think only a lunatic would have that opinion, That starts getting into more treacherous waters of gaslighting. So, and I like I said, I was going to tell you the difference between a gaslight and a lie. Oh, I'll get to that in a minute. Sorry. All right, we'll get to that in a minute. So I want you to think on something, which is what happened when you called your gaslighter out? Because I'm sure some of you have, right? You're like, yo, you're gaslighting me. Don't do that. And what do? They're like, you're right. I denied reality. Sorry about that. Is that what they said? Well, I'm going with no, they didn't. Guessing the reactions were more like this: rage. How dare you? You're the gaslighter. You're narcissistic. You're petty. There's something wrong with you. Get rage. Defensiveness, projection, that accusation that you're the one gaslighting me. Oftentimes contempt, like, ugh, you make me sick. You watch those stupid videos. And now you think you know all that kind of thing. Dehumanizing the target, like really vilifying a target, like you disgust me, you're nothing, like trying to really, really grind the target of the gaslighting into the ground. As we said, pathologizing the target, sometimes even calling into question the integrity of the target. You're petty, you're small-minded, and then the abandonment threats. So calling a gaslighter out, just like calling a narcissist out, simply doesn't work, right? So you're like, what am I supposed to do? So let's talk about gaslighting and lying. That's what I promised to do a minute ago. Let me use these as an example, and I'm going to read these to you because I know that some people may just be listening to this and may not be looking at the graphic. So say there's two people in a relationship. We'll call them partner A and partner B. Okay. So partner A goes to a bar and stays too long instead of going home for dinner on time, and doesn't say that they had planned on that, right? Partner B is really upset that partner A hasn't come home and actually drives to the bar where they see partner A sitting at an outside table enjoying drinks with friends. Now, lying would be partner B asks A, were you at the bar? And A says, no, I was not. That's a lie. Gaslighting is when partner B tells partner A, like, hey, I drove to the bar and I saw you there. And partner A says, you couldn't have seen me there because I wasn't there. So obviously you didn't see me there because I wasn't there. And you are so paranoid and I can't take this any longer. And then what might happen is partner B then would apologize for being so sensitive and being untrusting and says, you know what, I'm so crazy. People cheated on me in the past. That's how I get. But at the end of the day, partner A denied partner B's reality. That's gaslighting. That's the difference. Okay. So just so you have that difference more clear, all gaslighters lie, but not all liars gaslight. Okay. That's all gaslighting is lying, but not all lying is gaslighting. Lying is in fact a denial of reality. Gaslighting not only denies reality, but also dismantles the target. You're confused, you're paranoid, you're crazy. When it's just lying, an argument about lying focuses on the evidence. So if you show a liar the evidence, they'll be like, okay, yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I lied to you. And then you have a conversation about the lie. Why did they lie? Go from there. Gaslighters are not interested in evidence. They don't care about the picture you took. They don't care about the text message. They don't care about the email. They don't care. They're interested in breaking you down so they can control you, right? The gaslighting end game is to control you. The lying end game is to kind of get away with something, right? Like, I shouldn't have stayed at the bar. So I'm just going to like, yeah, okay. Yeah, I was there. I shouldn't have. And then might say like, I wanted to have fun. I was ashamed. I didn't want to make an excuse. I didn't want to hurt your feelings. They'll come up with a justification, but there will be a willingness to acknowledge the evidence. Gaslighter will not acknowledge the evidence. All right. Something else to keep in mind about this is betrayal trauma. It's just a useful thing to have in this framing, right? Because gaslighting really falls into the betrayal trauma space. The abuse that happens, the emotional abuse that happens in close relationships, results in far greater harm to a person than abuse perpetrated by strangers, right? Because there was a basis of trust. And so especially in childhood relationships, children almost have to unsee the truth to keep it going. So the gaslighting gets internalized. That didn't happen. We're a happy family. Like, we were good. Like I liked everyone, right? It's me. I'm the one who's off. And so the pathologizing the self, internalizing the gaslighting, because in many ways, sometimes the family system doesn't take the abuse seriously enough, right? Or doesn't take it seriously at all, or doesn't listen to it. So then in these situations, abuse can keep being perpetrated, the betrayal trauma, and the outcomes for survivors are worse. So gaslighting can really have some deep, pernicious kinds of roots. We talk about cognitive dissonance, right? Well, gaslighting raises that cognitive dissonance, because here's where a person being gaslighted gets stuck. You're being gaslighted. If you give in, right, because you just don't even want the argument, like, yeah, you're right. I'm being too sensitive. Then you actually feel bad in yourself. You're like, why am I giving in like this? That's not true. If you stand firm against the gaslighter, you say, absolutely not. That happened, and I am not being too sensitive. Sometimes people think like, am I being a little too fierce? Because now the gaslighter is coming at you. You're crazy. You're this, you're that. There's something wrong with you. Many survivors aren't steadfast to say, no. I hold to this reality. I hold to the truth. Many people will second guess themselves and say, maybe I'm being a little too rigid, right? Well, meanwhile, it's the gaslighter who's being rigid, but that's where people feel like they can't win. Like, how do I push back on this gaslighting? And that's what I'm going to get into with you today. There's lots of dynamics we've already talked about. It's a grooming and indoctrination process with gaslighting. They use tools like threatened abandonment to make you deny your experience because you don't want to lose the relationship. To me, over time, gaslighting is like death by 1,000 cuts. Every time it happens, you're like, is it me? Am I wrong? You're constantly second guessing. I say this as somebody who I have to say, and this is a personal reflection. I've been gaslighted in so many different relationships. For me, it's almost culminated in almost like an obsessive compulsive style. Like I'm constantly double checking to the point where it does make me somewhat inefficient. I'll probably spend 20 minutes doing something that could have probably been done in about 10, because I don't trust myself. And that's a lifetime of that, right? A lot of people also don't want to believe that someone they love could do this to them. Like, oh, they love me. Like, who? This is really manipulative. And that, of course, becomes that trauma bonded kind of haze. And then some people confuse the idea of a misunderstanding with gaslighting. Like, well, they said they didn't say it, and I can't remember everything that's ever happened in my life. So maybe I'm remembering it. And so what happens is the gaslighter isn't going to yield. But the person being gaslighted, because they usually have empathy, is a little bit more willing to be flexible and meet the gaslighter, if you will, halfway. There is no halfway. You meet the gaslighter halfway, you're being manipulated. So gaslighting has many faces. I'm going to take you through all these different forms of gaslighting, okay? This is where I actually think there's the real meat of this, because I think people don't understand how many forms gaslighting can take. So number one is emotional minimizing, right? And that's where somebody accuses you of being too sensitive. So they're saying whatever emotion you're having, it's too much. So your reaction's too much. And the emotion, which is nobody can ever judge an emotion, they say, no, that's too much of an emotion in the situation. The second form of gaslighting is when your commitment is being doubted. So it's when a person, let's say you decide to make a choice about something and you've really struggled with that choice, your commitment gets doubted. Like, I guess you don't really care about this relationship if you're considering this new job. It's a false correlation, because the two things are unrelated. You've grappled with it. You do care about the family. You do care about the new job. But that quick idea, like, guess you don't care, that doubting your commitment can often make people say like, oh, maybe they're right. You doubt yourself. And then you may not consider that possibility. Another form of gaslighting is presumed motivation. Like they make a presumption about your emotions or your motivation. This is the kind of thing of, why are you so angry? Why do you hate me so much? If a person hasn't told you they're angry or hasn't told you they hate you, for somebody to roll up, and you're basically, the gaslighters injecting their version of the events, their version of reality in you. So when somebody comes up to you and says, why are you so angry? And you're not, that actually can throw you off balance. You're like, I'm not angry. And then they're like, yes, you are. Stop lying to me. Now you get into the confused mud. Another form of gaslighting is when they make attributions of about your mental health. This is a part of that breaking down process of gaslighting. You're so paranoid, you must be mentally ill, you're narcissistic, the whole list. Stonewalling is a form of gaslighting. It's where you can't even make a point or share a point because they shut down that opportunity. Don't tell me that again. I don't want to hear it. What happens is when a person's gaslighted, they want to bring reality in. Like it might even be the kind of thing like, look, I just want to show you the 6 times you canceled on me, right? And you have all the messages in one place. You know what? Don't tell me. I don't want to hear it. What do you feel? You feel as though you've been completely shut down and shut off. So the only way to proceed in the relationship is not having had reality heard. Then there's what I call affirmation coded criticism, which I do believe is a form of gaslighting, which is when they say something to you like, no one will ever love you the way I love you. If anyone ever says that to you, you might want to start eyeing the exits because it's a deeply manipulative thing to say. Why wouldn't someone love you like that? In fact, you're lovable. So yeah, someone easily could love you that way. But what this does is in a way, it sort of gets you stuck in a loop with them. It devalues you and it denies reality. There's 7 billion people on the planet. Someone else, at a minimum, many else will love you the same way or more. And I'm sure much healthier because hopefully they won't gaslight you. There's the pain competition version of gaslighting. That's when somebody says to you, so like you might be sharing a real experience or feeling like, oh, I am having such a tough day and oh my gosh, or like, oh, I keep fighting with my partner or my wife, my husband, whatever. Somebody say, well, at least you have a spouse, or stop complaining. My job doesn't even have benefits. And you're like, I don't see the relationship. You're telling them about your own difficult experience. It's a bit like that stonewall. You get shut down, but this is more in the sense of you're sharing your painful experience and they're basically saying their pain is worse, or they may shut you down by saying someone else in the world's pain is worse. Like there are people starving. I have no doubt there are people starving and I had a bad day too. But a lot of people feel shut down by that and as though their pain isn't real. Another form of gaslighting is when they diminish your ability. So you might have studied really hard for a test or had to get a big project in for work or, just did something that you felt was hard and difficult. And the gaslighter says to you, that doesn't sound like it was difficult. That denies reality. It was difficult. You just told them it was difficult. When they say it wasn't, it also throws minimizing into that, right? Then there's things like not answering the question. So a way to gaslight someone is you ask them like, hey, remember, I don't know, like the time you, can you tell me like, this thing about your past relationship, you'd share this or, your thing you said to your friend, and then they just completely deflect and answer something else. It's a stonewally thing. It leaves a person who does that very confused, like, wait, what? And unfortunately, fortunately, we don't live in courtrooms, right? A judge or an attorney would say they're not answering the question, but we don't live in courtrooms and our families and our relationships or friendships shouldn't be those spaces. That's another form of gaslighting. Then there's the judge and jury model, back to courtrooms. So when a gaslighter would say things like, you have no right to feel that way. There's nothing that warrants you feeling that way. It's that in essence, they're really almost owning up to like, I get to decide how you feel, which is not only terrifying from a point of view of control, it's also this sense of your feeling isn't real unless I say it's okay. Oops, there we go. Then there's diversion, right? So you will bring up something to them. Okay, so you will say to them, listen, I'm getting concerned about you working late all the time. And they'll say, okay, so if we're going to talk about me working late, why don't we talk about that time you went on that business trip a few years ago and stayed an extra day? So that was a few years ago. You stayed an extra day on a business trip, and it has nothing to do with this person working late. But that idea of diversion, we're going to talk about this other thing and not address the question at hand, again, denies reality because you're saying, did not. And you start getting into that. How did these connect? And by then, the gaslighter sort of squirmed away. Triangulated communication also becomes another way that gaslighting happens. The gaslighter, you'll say something to them, I feel this, I want to talk about this, or you might even do some gray rocking. And then the gaslighter will say, it seems like you're getting some crazy ideas from your therapist or from your friend or from your family. So they're taking away the reality that this was actually your idea, but instead will attribute it to, for example, your therapist or someone else. And then you find yourself, no, my therapist didn't tell me this, but now you start having the wrong conversation, right? It pulls you out of what is to be the central focus. Trivializing is another form of gaslighting, when it's things like every little thing upsets you, when it's not true. And then denial, that's a classical part of gaslighting. I never said that. I never promised that. And that's when you start going through the text messages, because it's an absolute denial of reality. But there's more, folks. There's also memory doubting. And I think this is a very important part of gaslighting, because so much of gaslighting is about evidence. So it's somebody saying, that never happened. You must have a really bad memory, or you don't ever remember anything right. When this happens over many years, a person really does start living into the identity of like, I have a bad memory. So when somebody says to you, the gaslighter says that never happened, they capitalize on this idea that you have a bad memory, that they're the ones, they've already indoctrinated you into that. There's the self-victimization. So the gaslighter will be able to, it's almost like a form of stonewalling again. The self-victimization is when the gaslighter says, I know, I'm the bad person. I'm such a bad person and everything is my fault. The vast majority of people in gaslighted or narcissistic relationships, of all that empathy and a bit of that trauma bonding, will say, no, I'm not trying to say you're a bad person. No, you're actually cool. You're good. No, we're both responsible for this. The reality may very well have been that the thing you're talking about was their fault. But in trying to soothe and appease them, you then give in to their version of reality, which is they're not responsible. And you're even trying to pump them up and tell them they're good. Then there can be false empathy that's focused on pumping up a weakness in you. So it'll be things like, hey, I'm really worried about you. Are you okay? You're fine. But you may very well be bringing up their distortion of reality. Blame shifting is another form of gaslighting. And they'll often do things like this thing I'm doing is because of you. It's because of my parents. It's because of my colleagues. It's because people are out to get me. So that idea of blame shifting then becomes a gaslighting kind of a gambit, because basically what they're doing is, again, that they're denying reality and saying that their behavior is due to somebody else. I sometimes like to talk about small g and big G gaslighting, right? So small g gaslighting could be the like, that didn't happen. Almost like the lie, the lying part of it. The big G gaslighting is when it's consistent and chronic, and they really are trying to paint you out as though there's something wrong with you. Recently talked with someone who's been very gaslighted by a partner, very gaslighted. And the main upthrust of this person's narrative was that the gaslighter's narrative was that his partner was absolutely insane. And he would tell her, she's insane. Let me tell you the insane things she's doing. So he'd go around and tell everyone how insane she is, and then kept gaslighting her. That's a great example of big G gaslighting. By the time it was done, this person felt like she'd literally lost her mind and became very, very distressed. So let's talk about some tells. People are like, am I being gaslighted? Like, what are some things that could be happening to you that would tell you that you're being gaslighted? If you feel the need to send very long emails or text messages, because that's the only way you can get your thought out and prove your point, it's a pretty good sign you're being gaslighted. The next is when you feel like you have to provide an evidence base for your feelings. So like, I've organized all the emails, I've organized all the text messages, they're all in one document, they aren't looking at them. But when you feel the need to do that, it's a good sign you're being gaslighted. When you feel the need to record conversations, either obviously in front of them, like videoing them, or doing it secretly. And you may not even be recording them as something to use against them, but it's something to listen to so you don't feel crazy. But that desire to have a recording is another good sign that you're probably being gaslighted. Constantly having to check in with other people, like, does this feel okay to you? Like, does that right to you? Like you stop, well, you no longer trust your judgment. So you need other people to weigh in almost to a fault, that over reliance on others because you stop trusting yourself. Good sign you're being gaslighted. Rehearsing conversations, believe it or not. So you're like, okay, I'm going to talk to them. Let me make some notes. I'm going to make some notes because I get so confused when I talk to them. And they'll have their notes, right? I back in the day when I work with couples, I always knew when there's gaslighting happening. First of all, it'd be happening, but the person in the relationship being gaslighted would always come in with the notes. And my heart would break because it told me that this poor person could not even get a thought out without it being confused, contorted, distorted, denied. And so that need to either write the notes down and say, okay, I'm going to read this, or practice it in front of the mirror. That's a good sign you're probably being gaslighted. Giving a long disclaimer or a prelude, like, I just want to let you know that I believe in our relationship and da-ba-dee-ba-da-ba-doo. You give this long prelude because you know they're going to gaslight you and you think you can get ahead of it. Folks, you can't get ahead of it. So if you're giving these long buildups to what you're going to say, sometimes a sign you're being gaslighted. The feeling compelled that you have to put everything in writing because you need proof. And it's a fact. Don't stop yourself from doing it. It's a fact. But when you feel that you have to do that, probably being gaslighted. And then when you find yourself giving in and capitulating, okay, fine. We'll do it your way. Fine. Okay, it's fine. We'll just do it whatever way you want. That's a good sign you're being gaslighted too, because you just don't want to get into that confusing mud with them. So let's talk about the different types of gaslighting. The different types of gaslighting almost start with ourselves. It's like a small circle, and the circles keep getting bigger and bigger. So let's take on self-gaslighting. Self-gaslighting is what happens to anybody who's ever been in a narcissistic, abusive, or gaslighty relationship. Sometimes it looks like somebody being self-effacing, like, I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm doing. But what it tends to be is internalizing all of that gaslighting you've experienced. So it's a person saying like, I'm just too sensitive. Or I kind of did it a minute ago, but it's kind of true. I'm obsessive compulsive. And, we all have that thing. It's like we're trying to often get ahead of being gaslighted. I'm so disorganized or stressed. I never remember anything right if I don't write it down, or I don't know what I'm talking about. People self-gaslight all the time, and mostly it's an internalization, but sometimes it's self-protective. In essence, you gaslight yourself before the gaslighter can gaslight you. Gaslighting by proxy is when a third party doubts reality and sort of cements the dynamic. So let's say you talk to someone about someone who is behaving in a gaslighty way towards you. So someone's gaslighted you, and then you go talk to a third party. It could be a family member, it could be a work thing, it could be a friend, whatever. And that third party says to you like, well, can't you see their point of view? I think you're being paranoid. I think she's a really nice person. Or like, there's no way you had that experience with him. He's such a sweet guy. Or I think they're like this with everyone. So what that third party does, instead of saying, wow, this sounds really difficult, and they hear your point of view, they shut you down. And they say, I don't see a problem with that. Or I think they're a sweet person. And it sort of doubles down on the gaslighting already being done to you, and can really cement the sort of the distorted reality. Then there's collective gaslighting. Collective gaslighting is when multiple people together gaslight. So it could be observed, for example, in families where abuse or something else that was harmful was denied, that the reality of that was denied, or a group of friends, or even in the workplace that all hold the gaslighter's position. That never happened. He never said that. You keep imagining it. Or somebody saying you didn't have a difficult childhood. Your parents worked really hard for you. Like, oh, it wasn't that. He isn't that bad. And multiple people not only say that, they remain allied with the gaslighter. I call this UFO gaslighting because it's like all those movies where the poor sap sees the UFO and everyone, there's no UFO. You're like, I saw the UFO right there. Here's a picture. Everyone else saw it too, by the way, and they don't cop to it. There's no UFO. And so then the person who saw the UFO either completely goes mad or goes to Area 51 or something to find their fellow believers. But it's a group of people not believing you. Societal gaslighting is things like when entire systems collude. Again, people who have more power in a society tend to engage in this gaslighting. There's no discrimination in the world. There's no bias in the world. The world is a fair and equitable place. Those are examples of where societal gaslighting, which again, differentially impacts people who have more marginalized statuses within a society. Can you be gaslighted in therapy? Unfortunately, yeah. Survivors of narcissistic abuse and gaslighting often struggle in therapy if the therapist doesn't get it, because there can be a tendency to blame the person going through this. The one question that no survivor should ever be asked is, why didn't you just leave? Because anyone who asks that question doesn't understand how these relationships work. We can ask other questions, like, tell me the history of this relationship. Tell me how you experienced the red flags. Tell me how you're feeling now. Tell me what you want to do. But the why don't you just leave? Why did you stay feels blaming. And a person will say, did you not just listen to what I just said? Like, reality has been taken away, right? And then there's even the tendency to say, well, maybe your partner is right. Like, you do often seem suspicious and, oh, I don't know that somebody wants to have a text message shown to them. It's easier to pathologize the gaslighted person instead of the gaslighter, because it's the gaslighted person who more often is found in therapy, not the gaslighter. And then we kind of maintain the status quo of the gaslighters getting away with it. And in therapy, you believe that person has your best interest at heart and you trust them, right? Again, we go back to that trust. I don't care if it's a therapist, I don't care who it is. You always, and I'm always grateful when a client says, nah, that's not right. You're not hearing that right. I'm grateful for that, because I'll always praise the client, like, fantastic. Please, then I got that wrong. Please, say it again. And I apologize for not getting it right, because I know they're flexing a muscle too. And I have to own up to the fact that I didn't hear it. I don't say, well, I'm the therapist, I know what's best for you. There's also spiritual gaslighting, where people will actually question the people's faith. The reason you're stuck in this relationship is because you don't have enough faith. You're not manifesting your intentions properly. You're too negative. So the spiritual gaslighting, the denial of the experience of someone in the relationship, and pathologizing them for not having enough love and light coming out of their butt to, to qualify to be spiritual enough, it really does risk shaming survivors in a way that they may be more reluctant to seek help. Many times too, spiritual gaslighting can see the problems are because you aren't breathing right, or you aren't thinking right, or you aren't manifesting right, or you have bad energy, and we have to charge you $10,000 to get that bad energy out of you. But spiritual gaslighting is also often at the core of structures that can feel like cults. Do parents gaslight? I think a lot of you are nodding your heads now. Yeah, absolutely, they can, and they do. To be gaslighted in childhood, to have reality denied, can negatively shape your identity, can leave you with a sense of self-doubt, can really fill you with a sense of anxiety. And people who were gaslighted in childhood often spend lifetimes doubting their own judgment. The entire family system, again, that collective gaslighting, may actually get behind the gaslighter, all sort of contributing to that distorted version of reality. So that means when you get gaslighted in adulthood, you'll feel really triggered, because it happened then and it can really take you back to that time. As your parents get older, they're just going to keep gaslighting you. So don't wait for that to change. And if you were the scapegoat in your family system, you likely got the worst of the gaslighting. And for people who are scapegoated as kids in narcissistic family systems and then go on to adulthood and get gaslighted, you'll see that those impacts can often be much more profound. Now, in intimate relationships, close relationships, marriages, whatever, we see partner gaslighting, which is probably the form of gaslighting that most people are distressed about. That's where we see these patterns we've already talked about, like threatened abandonment, painting you as somebody who's mentally ill or just not thinking clearly, moving things around. I mean, they'll do things like move the remote or move the keys or move the checkbook and say, you say, where's the checkbook? And I'm like, well, it's in the drawer where you always left it. It's not there. Oh, I don't know. You must have moved it. Like, did I? And most people would say, no, you did it. But I am sure more than a few of you have had that physical environmental manipulation form of gaslighting. It's a really good way to drive someone completely out of their minds. And then pathologizing any responses you have. If you're being gaslighted by a partner, one of the most important things is that a person not be isolated. But so sadly, isolation is such a part of what gaslighting is. And the more stressed that relationship becomes, divorce, infidelity, narcissistic injury, the more gaslighting you see. Narcissistic people are better about lying about cheating than anything that they ever do. You say to them like, hey, something energetically shifted in this relationship. I feel it. Are you seeing someone else? No, not seeing anyone else. And they'll deny it and deny it and deny it, denying reality because you sense it, you saw it, you may even have seen a receipt or something. And then when the day finally comes that it opens up, they'll say, you asked me if I was seeing someone else. Like, I don't know, I was hanging out with someone. Like they'll actually go there and play those semantic games. But to have that denied, especially something that where it's a double betrayal, is an incredibly painful experience for survivors of narcissistic abuse. Now, anybody can gaslight you. Certainly the rest of your family can, especially siblings, your own adult children. The more close you are to someone, the more impactful their gaslighting can be. Does it happen in the workplace? All the time. In workplace situations, and I think in all gaslighting situations, documentation is everything. Because if you roll up to HR and saying, hey, I'm being gaslighted, I'm like, huh? You've got to say, listen, here's the chain of communication. And even then, you still may not be able to get like response from a workplace. But workplace gaslighting can be denial of the work you've done or contribution you've made, changing your responsibilities, future faking you, saying, hey, once we get through this project, you're going to get this promotion, you're going to get this, but they may say it orally, not put it in writing. And 6 months later, you've knocked yourself out. You're like, hey, we talked about that. And they'll say, yeah, no, I never said that. Those kinds of things will happen in workplace gaslighting. Workplaces that are framed as, hey, you just got to pay your dues and you'll get ahead, or this is just an intense workplace, or you got to work your way up the ladder. If you've got a toxic boss that set that tone, it's very unlikely that that will yield what you want unless you happen to be one of the people who is in the narcissistic person's good graces. These tend to be inequitable workplaces, very triangulating, kind of gossipy workplaces. And if people are gaslighted at work, they're confused. And listen, let's face it, confused people are not very efficient at work, but the narcissist gets to keep power. And the almighty divorce. If ever there was a place that gaslighting shows up, it's in divorces. One piece of advice I have for you: do not ever use this term in a deposition, in court, during mediation, or in front of a judge. It's a great word and it cuts to the chase. But there are certain words, because family court has not caught up, family court judges have not caught up, custody evaluators, all the rest of them. These folks don't want to understand narcissism. Okay. So when you use words from the narcissism vocabulary, including narcissism or gaslighting, there's a real risk that the court will view you as the more difficult antagonistic party. What you might want to do is frame it as very inconsistent communication, not honoring written agreements, that kind of thing. But don't call it gaslighting. All right. You can call it contradiction. You can call it poor communication. Always things like parenting apps or monitored forms of communication that are admissible as part of the court record, like talking parents is a great example of that. Those are the sorts of things that you would almost need in these kinds of gaslighted divorce situations. Maintain detailed records of your own and really work with your kids and teach them that their reality is their reality. And if somebody counters that, hold on to their reality. They don't have to tell the other person that this is my reality and get into it with them, but don't let your kids lose it, because what happened to too many of us in childhood is we lost our reality. It was taken from us through gaslighting. Medical gaslighting is when a person seeks out some form of healthcare and their physical symptoms are minimized. Or the healthcare professional will hear your complaints or concerns, and without appropriately working it up, might say, well, let's get you a mental health referral, kind of implying that this is all in your head, that there's not the right amount of lab work or the right lab work being done. They may minimize any research event. No, please, what did you do? An internet search on this? In minimizing the real symptoms you're having. This can be dangerous. Medical gaslighting can be dangerous. And disproportionately, it happens to people from marginalized groups, people of color, women, that kind of thing. So those are the things you need to keep in mind. That can really put a person in a precarious position. But you can see gaslighting in any relationship where there's a presumption of expertise, and there's often a power differential: student teacher, doctor patient, employer employee, religious leader or a pastor or something like that, and a parishioner, a lawyer client, and political leader, and everyone else who lives under that political leader. But this is really where, this is really what the gift of this was. And again, thank you for getting, being part of this community that's now hit 1 million, so we can get the word out. And as I get into the survival guide, I know for some of you want to do a deeper dive into healing from narcissistic abuse, even beyond what this is. And I get that. So we have developed a program, a healing program, a monthly program that includes workshops, guided meditations, question answer sessions, all kinds of content, journal prompts, you name it, and a really great community, closed community platform. If you're interested in that, you can click on the video notes and you'll find the link to that program. It takes this kind of stuff, but really punches it out to topics relevant to healing. But this survival guide is also a great place for you to think about your healing too, because if you can use these techniques, you might be in a better place in terms of surviving gaslighting. Number one, and you kind of did that by watching this, is avoid it and know what it is. Own what reality is and don't budge. If you do that early in meeting a narcissist, they'll often be like, yeah, you're not an easy mark, right? You got your wallet zipped up too tight into your pocket. They're going to probably move on to another target. But when you know what it is, a denial of reality, all the phrasing I've given you, it helps you identify it and open your eyes that somebody's doing this, leads you to maintain stronger boundaries with them, and don't get into the argument with them. You don't have to keep getting into it with them, but the earlier you know it and practice those boundaries, the better off it'll be. Number two, trust reality and your experience of reality. This can actually be a sort of an interesting mindfulness routine. Literally a couple times a day, like, how do I feel? I feel pretty good. I did this today. I was actually driving someplace unfamiliar and I had to drive my car backwards down a curvy hill. I was like, how do I feel right now? I feel angry because I feel like my car's about to go off a cliff. And you might say, oh, this girl's a little bit off. She's talking to herself. No, because it's sort of, what is my reality? Right now, my reality is this is how I feel. I do it a few times a day. But you can also ask, am I hungry right now? Yes, I am. Am I cold? Am I tired? If you've had reality stolen from you for so long, kind of indoctrinating yourself in a way back into reality can be a really useful exercise. Ask yourself questions out loud once a day. You can do it in the car, is a good place. So how was my day? My day was actually pretty good, despite the driving down the hill backwards. Talk to yourself. Ask yourself, what was the good thing that happened to me? What was the bad thing? In the middle of watching TV, am I enjoying this TV show? Or do I like how this tastes? I know this seems silly to you. It's actually not. If you've been gaslighted chronically enough, nobody's listened to your answers to this question, or they've doubted your answers. At least you know you won't, I hope, do this to yourself. It's a good exercise. You know me, I love me some deep technique, right? Going deep is a great anti-gaslighting technique. The usual: don't defend, don't engage, don't explain, don't personalize. If someone's gaslighting you, you can look at them and be like, okay, and walk away and recognize gaslighter's going to gaslight, right? And you don't need to engage with them, and you don't need to give them your version or any version or the version of reality or the text or anything. You know the truth. You know the reality. Going deep is powerful because, in a way, gaslighting is a form of baiting, right? They want you to get into it with them. That's where they get their juice. Don't give it to them. Find your validating voices. I'm going to spoil the film Gaslight. Sorry, you should have watched it by now. But the person being gaslighted in the film Her name is Paula. It took one person to help her. I want you to think back in your life at a time you were gaslighted. Did one person ever say like, oh, I just saw that? What? That person said that wasn't said. I heard it. They said it. How many times have you gone like, oh, I don't feel crazy. Thank you. Find your validating voices. These may be good friends, trusted colleagues, a therapist who knows, really understands what gaslighting is, people who hear you and do not gaslight you. When you have those people, really helps you develop this muscle. Number 5, cut the gaslighters out. I call this the toxic dump. And this isn't about turning away from people who might give you healthy dissent. Like, come on, you keep talking yourself out of that job. Like, and you're to give it a shot. Like somebody who's dissenting, but like maybe pushing you to be better, or might pushing you to be thinking of something a different way, but in a supportive way. But I mean the people who literally gaslight you or are simply not willing to validate reality, even if they don't agree with it, right? And so you want to get rid of those people. You want to get rid of those proxy gaslighters. You want to get rid of the flying monkeys. This might be all kinds of ways you do this. You might gray rock, go no contact, set boundaries, firewall. Gaslighters get their power. The more of them there are in your life, the more power each individual gaslighter gets. And that means cutting them, setting these boundaries in these relationships, like the real life relationships. Get them off their social media feed. The more of these people you can get rid of. Listen, all these people out here, your life could be so much better if you throw away all the extra clothes in your closet. Extra clothes in your closet, you need to get rid of these toxic people. That's what you need to be getting rid of. The more of that you do, the more you can get rid of some of this gaslighting energy. Number 6, talk out loud to yourself. I know this is going to make you think like, well, if that gaslighter hears me, they're going to really think I'm crazy. Don't do it in front of them. Please don't do that. But sometimes when we talk out and take our voice out of our head and put it in the world, we can be more in tune with our reality. So if you can do this, now again, if there's a lot of people around, this is not going to work. I acknowledge that. But maybe you're getting ready in the morning. Okay, we're getting up. Okay, kitty cat, it is time for your yummy breakfast. I actually do talk like that in the morning. When you're preparing a meal, like, here we go, onion, let's chop you up. Why? Because it gets you attuned and it breaks you out of the autopilot. Because when we're being gaslighted, we get in our head. Popping out of our head can help. Okay. I mean, again, when I'm writing, sometimes I just talk while I write, but that talking kind of brings you out of your head, and it can actually do you more good than you think. And especially since you're not going to I hope, not gaslight yourself. The next one, sorry, there we go, is keep a journal, a gaslighting journal. Writing it down can help you see how often gaslighting happens. And you can also make a note of the kinds of people, topics, conversations that are more likely to result in gaslighting in your particular situation. So you can keep a list of these experiences, but writing them down and looking at them over time can really help you see a pattern. Like, they doubted the time of my appointment, told me I was being too sensitive when they didn't show up to a school meeting, keeps telling me the finances worked out. But over time, you might see certain patterns, maybe more gaslighting over money, over appointments, about working extra hours. And as you see those patterns, it might make you think, okay, here we go again. I'm going to get gaslighted, or maybe I'll do this communication in writing or something. But finding those patterns can really be helpful. You also need to understand your own personal history with gaslighting. For some people, they've been being gaslighted since before they could probably understand language. Did it happen in your family of origin? Let's say, in your best case scenario, there was somebody who saw your childhood and actually saw what was happening and won't be defensive about it. Maybe you have a benevolent aunt or grandparent or sibling of like, yeah, no, that's what was happening in our childhood. It can also help to look backwards and ask yourself, how did I rationalize? How did I think about this when I was younger? Because what can happen is if you can figure out the kinds of justifications you engaged in when you were a child for gaslighting, you might then be able in adulthood to say, I'm doing the same kind of thing. Because kids don't have a choice, right? They got to kind of stay in good stead with their parents, or there's really no other game in town. But that can lead you to almost normalize gaslighting, that you're the one who's wrong. You're the one who, you're the one who's not seeing reality correctly, kind of thing. And then you might also want to ask yourself, are these family members still gaslighting you? The ninth thing is stop justifying it and stop self-gaslighting. The core of the narcissistic relationship is trauma bonding, right? And one of the core trauma bonded behaviors is justification. They didn't mean it. They're really stressed. I bet this is partly my fault. It's all about that cognitive dissonance, right? Make it all fit. But what happens is we then start using the gaslighting language. I'm the one who's too sensitive. Maybe because I keep remembering, or maybe I can't remember things, and that's why they keep getting worked up. They have a really hard job. I can't expect them to be a good communicator. You might even rationalize the gaslighting. Everybody gaslights sometimes. It's not, again, I'm not telling you to engage with these folks. Please know that. Watch all this and say, I do not want you to engage with the gaslighters. You're never going to call them out. But I also don't want you to gaslight yourselves. Stop justifying the behavior in your mind. It's not okay. It's not. And it's a real sign that this relationship is not in a healthy place. Number 10 is stop apologizing. If there was one signature move of anybody who's ever survived not only narcissistic abuse, but gaslighting, it's chronically apologizing. And people who are gaslighted apologize. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean, I'm so sorry. Oh, forgive me. I apologize for that, right? It's so reflexive for survivors. You say, I'm sorry and I apologize. You're not even aware you're doing it. But when you do catch it. I don't care if you even just make a little mark on your hand and quickly get it into a journal at some point. Because many times we apologize, believe it or not, when we're gaslighted. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I'm sorry for nagging you. I'm sorry for questioning you, or just I'm sorry. There's something about that gaslighting thing where they're like, I never said that. How could you? Oh, you're like, I'm sorry, right? Think of how often that happens. There's this almost like a form of consent that comes from the I'm sorry. It's really, you're signing off on their version of reality. Try to catch yourself in that. Number 11, let's keep our side of the street clean too. Be mindful that you don't gaslight other people. Sometimes we do this in subtle ways. We might ask, for example, are you sure? But you just ask the person a question. Hey, do you want another piece of chicken? They say, no, thanks. Are you sure? Oh, they just said they didn't want it. You could, the better response would be, do you want another piece of chicken? They say, no, thanks. She's like, cool. There's plenty up here if you want it. So now you've let them know there's plenty up here and they can have it. But are you sure is actually kind of doubting reality, right? Doubting their reality, certainly, but doubting reality. They just said, no, thanks. Accept a person's answer, embrace it with empathy, and move on. Catch yourself when you say to someone, what were you thinking? Don't ask them that. What were you thinking really questions what they did and their judgment. Instead, say, tell me more about what that was about. It gives them a chance to actually talk about it. Instead of saying to someone, what is wrong with you? The thing you can try is to give them, again, start with empathy, but also give them the chance to share their experience without you judging it as something wrong. And instead of saying to someone, that never happened, because, unless you're 1000% sure and can say, listen, I have video of that day, that didn't happen. Say, okay, hey, you know what? Can you tell me your recollection of the event? Because this is what I recalled, but I'd love to hear also what you recalled. Hold space for that, okay? But we don't want to be players in gaslighting in any way, shape, or form. This one, I should have put this at number 1 because it's so important. You got to cultivate social support. If you want to protect yourself and support yourself when you're being gaslighted, you need gaslight-free zones in your life. These are the spaces in your life where you can share, you are heard, reality is upheld, and you feel accepted. And that's going to look different for everyone. It could be friends, like I said, it could be therapist, Family members who are cool and good and not part of the gaslighted system. Could be support groups. You might even want to consider, sort of forming a gaslight-free social support group. Again, on that healing platform I told you that I've developed, we actually have that kind of a community platform where it's all survivors. So there's a little bit more mindfulness, a lot more mindfulness around not gaslighting people. And again, that link is in the video notes. But these gaslight-free zones are the spaces where you can hold on to reality, and then they become essential to you saying, wait, my reality is valid. Reality is valid. This is reality. And you then will find your voice again if you have that social support. The gaslighter is counting on your isolation. Okay. Number 13, you got to manage that social media use. If somebody's not directly gaslighting into your face, it's happening all the time on social media. On social media, we get exposed to kind of being gaslighted even by strangers, even though that's not as potent, but people who are denying reality. If you have gaslighty friends or family or followers or whatever, consider blocking their feeds. You don't need to see that. You don't need to delete them entirely, but you don't need to see their stuff. Monitor your use and catch yourself in idle scrolling, because sometimes you're kind of like just watching this kind of gaslighty picnic go by. Just there's better uses of your time. And number 4, recognize that some of these influencer sites can be a bit gaslighty, and they're not necessarily a portrayal of reality. I've got 6 kids and here they are, and we all made pancakes from scratch with the wheat we grew in our garden, and everyone's in white and they all love each other. And so then you're like, oh my God, I'm a terrible mother because I just gave my kids Lucky Charms and I've just turned my kids' shirts inside out so nobody can see the dirt. That's the reality. Good for you. The white shirted, wheat growing, organic muffin baking person, not so much. So those influencer sites are meant to put out a false reality and in a way gaslight you. You don't need it. The best thing you can do is no. Number 14, be an ally to somebody who's being gaslighted. Okay. This is so important because what you'll see, let's say you're at a meeting. All right. And you see someone being gaslighted in that meeting. And maybe it's a meeting where you don't have a ton of power either. But after the meeting's done, you take that person aside. Hey, can I talk to you for a second? You say, I saw what happened there. And what you heard, like that was right. I agree with you. Sometimes, like when a person's being actively gaslighted, we often have that sympathetic nervous system response. We kind of freeze. We're not sure what to say. But if you could be that for someone, and heck, if you do have the power in a situation to call the gaslighter out on behalf of someone else, that person you call out is still going to be pushing back on you. You're not trying to change the gaslighter, but what you might be doing is helping out that person who was gaslighted, that other person. You're intervening on their behalf. What it can do is it can also help you feel a sense of power in the face of a gaslighter, as well as kind of set someone free, which I can't think of a greater gift that you could give to someone. Number 15 is if you can take a minute before you respond to someone, anyone, you will be the narcissist whisperer. When we are gaslighted, we tend to become reactive. So I never said that. Yes, you did. You said that. You said that. Look, 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 look. Messy. Okay. I understand it. I'm not judging it. I've done it many times myself, right? Sympathetic nervous system. Rah! But if we can use that space between the gaslight and our response, we can catch ourselves. We literally have that moment. It's almost like slow motion, right? You get gaslighted. You breathe. You're like, okay, reality has just been denied. You breathe again. And you calmly respond. You don't give in. You don't tell them they're a gaslighter. You might even say, interesting. Or got it. Or, all right. And then you step away. And then you might go into the bathroom and cry or scream or hit your punching bag or whatever you do. But that new response, instead of the, no, you didn't. Yes, I did. Da, 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 da. You can really start bringing this down. They're counting on you getting frothed up. You calm is actually kind of scary for them, and it's good for them to get a little scared. Number 16, and I don't mean for this to sound hokey, I think it's actually really important. If you were gaslighted in childhood, many of us wonder what would have happened if someone had intervened on our behalf and told us like, wow, that's not true. The reality is actually this. Imagine if someone had talked to you as a child and explained that, yeah, you're not imagining this. This is true. This is real. Reality and your experience are important. And an adult helped you feel safe and held space for you. We can't go backwards. We can't make ourselves into children again, but we can talk to our child self, because those core wounds from being gaslighted as a child, those definitely remain. And when we're gaslighted as adults, in some ways we pop back to feeling like that gaslighted child. If you, I mean, again, some people don't like this kind of thing, but if you find a picture of yourself, even as a child, look at that picture and say, hey, I believe you. Your feeling is valid. Reality, this is reality, not what someone else tells you it is. You've got to recognize that to keep doubting yourself. When you gaslight yourself as an adult, you're gaslighting that child again. And sometimes recognizing that that is one and the same. You, that child, the same. Don't gaslight yourself because you're gaslighting that innocent child that's already been gaslighted enough. It's just a different way to frame it and sort of say, I do need to take better care of myself. Number 17 is a good one. If you haven't seen Gaslight, this will be a little bit tricky again, spoiler alert, but you got to beat them with their own gaslight. What do I mean by that? At the end of Gaslight, like I said, spoiler alert, the scene is absolutely brilliant. The gaslighted husband is tied up in the attic by the police for the crime he committed. And his wife comes in, the wife he gaslighted and literally drove out of her mind. And there was a knife that she could use to cut him free, and he'd get free. And throughout the movie, he told her, you're crazy, you're insane. And she really believed him. So there it was. There was the knife. He cut him free. He'd be able to run away because the police officer had gone away long enough that he could be. And when he says that to her, she says, I don't know. I'm insane and I'm absolutely out of my mind. And an insane person, well, an insane person wouldn't cut their husband free. A sane person would, right? A very sane, well-thinking person, she would cut her husband free because she'd want her husband. But I'm insane. Yeah, I know that now. I'm absolutely crazy. And a crazy person wouldn't set her husband free. So she walked away. I was like, you go, girl. So stick it right back to them. So when they may need you, and they may like, hey, I need your help, say, I don't know. I have memory problems. It feels a little passive aggressive. I'll own it. But it's a great way to stick it back to them, because that indoctrinated narrative is what worked for them until it didn't. There often is a day when the narcissistic person finally needs you. And on that day, it's a great way to say, I'm kind of mentally impaired. My advice is not going to work for you. Number 18, don't gray rock yourself. Okay. What do I mean by that? Sometimes what happens is that, is gaslighting. Okay. When we're gaslighted, it is supposed to trigger us, right? It is, because it's a denial of reality. It's a very uncomfortable, destabilizing thing to have happen. And when we get completely activated, a lot of people are like, I don't like this. I feel like I'm completely dysregulated. You're not. You're having a normal reaction. And so what you don't want to judge that reaction. What you can do is say like, okay, I can slow down. And it's okay. Like what I mean by don't gray rock yourself is don't talk to yourself like, oh, come now. There's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. You're supposed to be triggered. It's just that the narcissistic or gaslighting person can't see that you're triggered. You just got to be kind to yourself and step back, because that's not where you're at. Okay. So I hope that this has given you some clarity on what gaslighting is, some tools to cope with it, the different ways it shows up in relationships. As you can see, this isn't as simple as somebody just saying that never happened. There's all these other tactics that are used. And once you see it, you're like, whoa, I actually didn't realize how gaslighted I was. And more than anything, so many people leave gaslighted or narcissistically abusive relationships actually really feeling as though they're impaired, and you're not impaired. You're having exactly the reactions we'd expect someone to have under this kind of pressure. Now, that's not to say that you're like, oh, I'm not impaired, so nothing wrong with me. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you. Therapy and other kinds of support become crucial after you've been through these experiences, just to get yourself calibrated, especially if these are legacy issues. And as always, I hope you find this content helpful, but it's never meant to be a substitute for therapy. To really do that deep dive and talk with someone, you need to sort of you have to seek out those appropriate, resources, and wherever you are, to have that chance to talk it through. But I am really, really tired of seeing how much lost human potential we see to people who have really, really come up in the world and simply doubt themselves at every turn. The amount of inefficiency that gaslighting creates, because we are constantly doubting ourselves, because we question ourselves, because we don't believe ourselves. And I'll stop the share so you can fully see me, and put myself right there. All of that becomes really, really important. I think that makes more sense. Okay. All of that it's so important to understand that, because when you recognize it as a loss of efficiency, right? It's like running 10 apps on your phone at the same time. Phone slows down, right? That's just a phone. We're talking about you. And gaslighting is like running 50 apps on your phone and having 17 devices running on your slow home internet. It is not good for us. So to the degree you can see this, the sort of the final piece I want to leave you with is never call the gaslighter out. Okay? Never. Because when you call a gaslighter out, it's the same as calling a narcissistic person out. It's going to end up becoming a lot of defending yourself, a lot of backing and forthing. It's about like, well, don't tell me about your reality. That's your reality. It becomes this whole subjective war of words. It is pointless. So the real takeaway I want you to have from today is to know what it is, so you don't interact with it, right? You know how like when you're at the airport, like if you see a suspicious package, don't pick it up. Well, if you see a gaslight, don't pick it up. Recognize what it is, step away from it, pay attention who's doing it to you, and recognize that this is not necessarily a safe person in your midst. And when you know that and you find other sources of support that can sort of ungaslight you, as it were, by validating you, those are people you want to keep close. Even if you only have one person in your life where you can turn to and say, is there something wrong with me? Did I hear that wrong? And just one person, no, you didn't hear that wrong at all. Like that was off. You think about that. We've all had that absolute audible release. Like, thank you for leaving me feeling that there's not something wrong with me. I think that's what I've tried to do today for all of you through this program, but I'm not sitting there with you. So I'm not seeing the specific situations in your life. So again, I hope this was helpful. I can't thank you enough for your support of this channel. It's been a real pleasure to put this together and shape it in a way that I think would be most helpful for all of you, and I hope it is. If you are looking to do that deeper dive, please join us in our healing program, or at least come check it out. You can check out that link in the video notes, and I will continue to, as long as I can, as long as I'm still standing, continue to commit myself to bringing you as high quality and responsive content on YouTube as I can, to help answer your questions about the absolutely confusing and frankly devastating landscape of gaslighting, narcissistic relationships, and the fallout of narcissistic abuse. Again, thank you again for your support of me, and accept this as a gift, which I hope helps you and people you care about. Bye-bye now. 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 Bye-bye now.